This weekend, my parents are throwing a big dinner to celebrate their 30th wedding anniversary. They've invited me, my husband, and a bunch of relatives. On paper, it sounds like the kind of event you wouldn't even think twice about attending, because it's your parents' milestone, right? But me? I've been dreading it. And the reason has everything to do with my sister. This weekend, my parents are throwing a big dinner to celebrate their 30th wedding anniversary. They've invited me, my husband, and a bunch of relatives. On paper, it sounds like the kind of event you wouldn't even think twice about attending, because it's your parents' milestone, right? But me? I've been dreading it. And the reason has everything to do with my sister. We're only 2 years apart, but you'd never know it by the way we relate to each other. We've never been close. If I'm being honest, I think she's carried resentment toward me since we were kids, and a lot of that started at home. My mom was strict, military background, the whole deal, and she turned everything into a competition between us. It wasn't just about doing your best. No. It was about being better than your sister. Who could catch the bus first? Who folded laundry faster? Even the smallest chores turned into battles. At first, I thought it was normal sibling rivalry. But over time, the game started cutting deeper. You see, I was always the one who excelled at school. I brought home good grades, high test scores, glowing report cards. My sister, Diana, wasn't wired that way. She struggled to keep up, and instead of helping her find her strengths, my mom punished her. I'll never forget the nights they sent her to bed without dinner or made her stand in the corner until her legs buckled. And every time, Mom would point to me like I was some gold standard. Why can't you be more like your sister? It broke her spirit. And honestly, it weighed on me, too. Because while Diana was cracking under the pressure, I was terrified of slipping. One bad grade, one missed assignment, and I'd be next. Eventually, it all came crashing down. Right before I left for college, Diana swallowed a bottle of sleeping pills. Thank God my parents found her in time. She survived, but it shook our entire family to its core. Suddenly, my parents, especially my mom, finally saw the damage they had caused. They rushed her into therapy and treated her like she was made of glass after that. But the shift wasn't exactly healthy. Instead of finding balance, they swung in the opposite direction. They stopped holding her accountable for anything. She refused college? They let it go. Jobs came and went because of missed shifts or arguments with coworkers. They made excuses. And now, all these years later, she still lives at home, doesn't pay a dime toward bills, and leans on them for everything, groceries, rent, you name it. She's not in crisis anymore. She's functional. She's got friends, she goes out, she parties. But it's all on their dime. And the part that cuts me most? She knows exactly how to play into their fear. They're so scared of pushing her too hard and triggering another spiral that she uses it as a free pass. And yes, they've even asked me to chip in financially. To help cover household expenses. But how can I send money every month while she lounges at home like life owes her a break? I had to draw a line. Now, let me tell you about where this really twists the knife. My husband. He knows all of this. He's listened to every detail, every messy story. And he cannot stand Diana. Not only because she mooches off my parents, but because she constantly crosses boundaries with him. From the moment she met him, she's flirted. Touches that last too long, comments with that fake "I'm just kidding" smile. I'd call her out, and she'd laugh it off like I was being uptight. But it wasn't just her, it was my parents too. When my husband was still just my boyfriend, my mom looked right at him and said, "You'd actually be a better match for Diana. You two have the same humor." And my dad backed her up. I remember sitting there, stunned. Who says that? Who tells their daughter's partner they'd be better off with her sister? At first, we thought maybe it was an awkward joke. But no. They kept saying things like that, over and over. Even on my wedding day. Minutes before the ceremony, my mom pulled my husband aside and whispered, "Are you sure you want to marry Lisa?" As if she was offering him an out. I fought with them hard after that. I even cut them off for a while. But they apologized, swore they'd never cross that line again. And yet, the very next year, at Diana's birthday, they tried to get my husband to pose next to her for photos. He flat out refused, and we left before the cake was even cut. Their excuses? Oh, she's just never had a boyfriend. Maybe being around him inspires her to aim higher. What's the harm in a picture if it makes her happy? I'll tell you the harm, the constant erosion of my dignity in my own marriage. That's why my husband and I stopped going to birthdays, stopped visiting, stopped showing up to family gatherings. We've had to protect ourselves. But now, here we are again, my parents begging us to attend this anniversary dinner. They say the whole extended family will be there. They say people will notice if I'm missing. And I know exactly how it will play out. Diana will be there. She'll act innocent. My parents will brush off her behavior like always. And my husband will be uncomfortable the entire night. So no, we don't want to go. It's not about whether he'd ever leave me for her. That's not even a thought. I trust him completely. What hurts is the disrespect, the way my parents keep pushing this narrative, like my marriage isn't even real to them. And sitting with that invitation in my hand, all I could think about was my childhood. The competitions. The punishments. The overdose. The way my parents shifted from too much pressure to none at all. And now here we are. Full circle. But this time, I'm not sure I'll play along. The week leading up to the dinner felt like walking on a glass floor. Every step I took made that faint, nerve-splitting ping in my chest. I tried to busy myself with normal things, grocery shopping, laundry, folding shirts the way my husband likes them. But the invitation sat on the kitchen counter like a small, cold stone I couldn't ignore. It glinted every time I walked past it. My husband could tell I was spiraling. He's good at reading me, one of the reasons I married him. He put down his coffee, took my hand, and with that dry half-smile of his said, "So, if I'm supposedly perfect for Diana, is Mrs. Hargrove next door perfect for your dad? Asking for a friend." He said it like it was a joke, but the joke landed like a pebble in a pond, little ripples, tighter and tighter. I laughed at first because what else do you do when someone makes a weird, painful joke? But then I felt my face go hot. The absurdity of it all, my parents matchmaking my husband to my sister while life keeps going in weird, stubborn circles. "Don't," I told him, softer than I intended. "Don't give them that satisfaction." We made rules. Not dramatic declarations, just small armor for the night. No prolonged hugs from my sister. No forced photos where my husband looks like a prop. If either of us felt cornered, we'd leave. No explanations, no posturing, just out the door and into the car. We agreed to back each other up, quietly. I would not be the only person looking out for myself. The day of the anniversary arrived like a weather change. The house smelled faintly of my mother's perfume, too floral, like she was trying to perfume away the years, and the sky outside had the low, gray light that always makes everything feel theatrical. I dressed in something that felt neutral, respectful but not showy. My husband looked at me in the hallway as I zipped my dress and said, "You look calm." His voice had that small, proud warmth that made me want to be brave. When we pulled into my parents' driveway, the world looked smaller and louder at the same time. Cousins' cars in the circular drive, a small buffet table visible through the dining room window, a cousin laughing at something without the shadow I felt. My stomach clenched, but the front step felt familiar, the same wood worn by 1,000 small family comings and goings. My hand tightened around my husband's. We were greeted with the usual smiles that never quite reached the eyes. Hugs that felt like formalities. My mother's voice, brighter than it should have been, said, "We're so glad you came." We were worried, people were talking. The implication landed like a light shove. People would talk if we were the only ones absent. People always had something to say. Diana was there before we even finished our first awkward hellos. She was wearing something loud, red, like she wanted attention to orbit around her, and she moved through the room like she owned a stage. She pinned on the same airy grin she always used when she wanted to disarm me, and then she drifted toward my husband as if gravity had a favorite. I watched them from a step back. He kept his distance, polite but guarded. She leaned in, the kind of lean that says, "I'm comfortable, you're noticed." She laughed too close to him, her makeup catching the light. My mother caught my eye and gave the tiniest nod, like she'd planted a seed and was waiting for it to sprout. My father, who used to be quiet and watchful, sat beside Mrs. Hargrove, the neighbor my husband had joked about, sipping his wine and smiling where he normally wouldn't. Of all the surprises, that small tableau made my pulse stutter. Dinner was a blur of canned laughter and clinking silverware. Conversation skirted around politics and jobs, the safe, practice topics that keep people from touching the real things. At one point, my aunt asked about my work, and I answered. I kept my responses brief. My husband traded stories with a cousin I hardly knew, palatable, harmless banter. But the air shifted like it does before a storm when my mother stood up and cleared her throat. Every conversation slowed, plates paused. She had that look, too bright, too proud, the kind of look someone has when they are about to make a big announcement. My heart sank because I knew that face. It meant she had a plan, and plans in our family usually meant somebody else's feelings would be rearranged to fit it. She raised her wine glass and said, 30 years. Isn't that just something? The room echoed with polite applause. Then she smiled that smile that could mean both warmth and mischief. We're so grateful for all of you being here. Family, she gestured, sweeping the room like it was a painting she'd curated, and for the surprises life gives us. She paused. Her eyes landed on my husband for a beat that felt longer than a beat. Diana leaned forward, expectant, the way you lean toward a prize you've convinced yourself you deserve. My husband shifted in his chair. I could see his jaw tighten, the slight clench as he steeled himself for whatever was coming. I reached for his hand under the table and squeezed. He looked down at me, then up at my mother, then around the room. My mother's smile widened, but there was something else there now, an edge, like a blade covered in sugar. And then she said the thing that made my blood run cold. We've always believed in destiny. She lifted her glass higher, and in recognizing it when it stands right in front of you. The room tuned in. My throat went dry. My husband's hand was hot in mine. Diana's grin split her face in a way that made me want to step between them and pull the air out of her lungs just to stop the sound. The neighbor, Mrs. Hargrove, glanced up from her seat beside my father and smiled politely, completely unaware of the gravity of this moment. I realized, with shrinking certainty, that my mother had chosen this night, the night everyone would be watching, to do something she'd been hinting at for years. The kind of thing she's always been fond of, a public nudge, a comment made loud enough to become a rumor if repeated. My husband swallowed. I braced myself. Whatever came next, whether it would be a toast, an introduction, a suggestion, I knew it would force a line to be drawn somewhere. And I wasn't sure which side I wanted to stand on. Then my mother raised her glass a fraction higher, smiled that impossible smile, and said, "To perfect matches." For a second the word hung there, perfect, then everyone followed her lead and raised their glasses. The clink of crystal felt like a starting gun. I held my breath, because in my family, a toast is never just a toast. It's a signal. And mine had just been sounded. The sound of glass chiming around the table echoed in my skull like warning bells. To perfect matches. That phrase. It wasn't innocent. Not in my family. Not after everything they'd said, all the jokes about how my husband was better suited for my sister. I forced a smile because that's what you do when your whole extended family is watching. My husband, though? He didn't play along. He raised his glass halfway, then set it down with a quiet clink, his eyes never leaving my mother's. The move was subtle, but I swear the air shifted. My sister Diana leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine like she was savoring some private victory. She gave my husband that smug sideways glance, like she already knew what my parents meant. Like she thought she was the perfect match being toasted to. I could feel my nails digging into my palm under the table. Dinner limped on after that, the conversations brittle, everyone pretending not to notice the tension simmering at our end of the table. My cousins chattered about vacation plans, an uncle told a recycled joke, but I barely heard a word. My ears were tuned to every sound Diana made, her too loud laugh, her fake little sighs, the way she leaned in whenever my husband said anything. Finally, dessert was served. A giant cake, 30 candles lit up like a bonfire. Everyone gathered to sing, the flames flickering across faces that looked too comfortable, too oblivious. I leaned in toward my husband and whispered, "We can leave after this." He gave the smallest nod, his jaw still tight. But then, as if the night hadn't already been a cruel joke, my father clapped his hands. "Before we cut the cake," he announced, "let's get a picture of the happy couple, and our daughters." My stomach dropped. I knew what was coming. He gestured toward my husband. "Go on, stand next to Diana. Just for one photo. It'll make her happy." I froze. The room seemed to tilt. Diana's grin spread, her cheeks flushed with excitement as she patted the spot beside her. My mother beamed, like this was some harmless little request. Just a picture. Just one moment. But it wasn't just. It was a humiliation dressed up as tradition. I turned to my husband. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, sharp, steady, unflinching. He didn't move. The silence stretched. Cousins shifted uncomfortably, someone coughed, the candle sputtered. And then, calmly but firmly, my husband broke the silence. He said, "No. Just that. One word." Clear enough to slice through every false smile in the room. My sister's face fell, twisting into something ugly before she could hide it. My mother blinked, confused, then laughed like he was being playful. "Oh, come on, it's just a photo." But my husband leaned forward, his voice low but carrying across the table, "With respect, I'm not here for games. I'm here for my wife. If you can't respect that, then we'll excuse ourselves." The room went dead quiet. Forks lowered, mouths hung open. My father's smile faltered for the first time all evening. And me? My heart hammered in my chest, but for once, it wasn't from shame or dread. It was pride. Pure, unshakable pride. Diana's chair scraped back, her face flushed red. She muttered something under her breath I couldn't catch, then stormed off toward the kitchen. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. And in that silence, with every relative's eyes burning into us, I realized something. This was no longer about awkward jokes or uncomfortable dinners. This was a line being drawn, right here, in front of everyone. The only question was, what would happen when we walked across it? The silence that followed could have cracked the plaster off the walls. All around us, cousins, uncles, aunts, they were frozen, forks hovering halfway to their mouths, eyes darting between my husband, me, and my parents like they just stumbled into the middle of a movie they weren't prepared to watch. My father cleared his throat, trying to smooth things over. "Son, no need to be dramatic," he said, forcing a laugh that didn't land. "It's just a bit of family fun." But my husband didn't so much as flinch. He sat back in his chair, calm, steady, his hand finding mine under the table. "Respect isn't dramatic," he said evenly. "It's the bare minimum." I swear I heard my aunt choke on her wine. My mother's smile vanished like someone had ripped it off her face. She tried to recover with her usual weapon, guilt. "After everything we've done for you," she began, her voice rising, "this is how you repay us? By embarrassing us in front of our family." I felt my chest burn. That old reflex kicked in, the one that made me want to shrink, to apologize, to keep the peace. But before I could even open my mouth, my husband cut in again, sharper this time. "With all due respect, Mrs. Carter, what's embarrassing isn't me refusing a photo. What's embarrassing is a mother telling her daughter's husband he'd be better off with her other child." Gasps. Real, audible gasps echoed around the table. A cousin dropped her fork, the clatter ricocheting across the silence. Diana stormed back in at that exact moment, her face blotchy, a glass of something strong in her hand. She froze when she realized what he'd said, eyes flashing between our parents and us. My mother's jaw trembled. That was years ago. You don't need to dredge that up in front of everyone. But my husband didn't back down. He leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but loud enough for the whole room. "It wasn't years ago when you asked me, right before the ceremony, if I was sure about marrying Lisa. It wasn't years ago when you kept nudging me next to Diana for photos. It wasn't years ago when you toasted to perfect matches. You did that tonight." The words hit like hammer blows. My mom went pale. My father's mouth opened, but no words came out. For once, the man who always had a smug comment ready was speechless. And me? I sat there stunned, a mix of terror and relief knotting in my chest. For years, I'd been the one trying to hold it together, biting my tongue, pretending it wasn't that bad. But here was my husband, cutting straight through decades of dysfunction with the blunt truth. Diana finally spoke, her voice sharp and dripping with venom. "You think you're too good for this family, don't you?" She slammed her glass on the table. "That's fine. We never wanted you here anyway." That was it. My husband stood up, pulled out my chair, and offered me his hand. "Then you won't have to see us here again," he said, calm as stone. The entire table erupted into whispers. My mother tried to call after me, my father muttered something about disrespect, but their voices blurred into static as I took my husband's hand and stood. My legs shook, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. We walked toward the door, every step like a declaration. Behind me, I heard my mother call my name one last time, her voice sharp, desperate. But I didn't turn around. Not this time. Because in that moment, I knew, leaving wasn't just about escaping one dinner. It was about finally stepping out of the twisted shadow my parents had kept me in my whole life. And as the door shut behind us with a heavy click, I realized something else: this wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot. Because families like mine? They don't just let go. They pull. They scheme. They lash back. And I had a sinking feeling my parents weren't done with us yet. Update 1. First, thank you. Honestly, I didn't expect anyone to read that rambling mess I posted, so seeing your replies felt like finding a bunch of tiny flashlights in a dark room. My husband read the thread too, and after stewing on the invitation for a bit, he said something that's been bouncing around my head nonstop. He told me he thinks we should go. Not because he wants to be polite, and not because he's desperate to be standing in the same room as my parents' bad behavior. He sees it as a tactical move. His logic was blunt and a little ruthless: if we skip the anniversary, my parents will invent some reason that makes me look bad to the extended family. They'll spin a story, he said, and you'll be the one with the awkward excuse they can throw around. He made that tiny, annoyed smile he gets when he's plotting. It's dangerously convincing. His other point cut even deeper. If we show up, and if Diana starts her usual nonsense, flirting, staging little scenes, getting my parents to egg her on, then this would be the best possible moment to put everyone on notice. Right there, in front of cousins and aunts and people who actually know us, there's no room for their later spin or, oh it was just a joke, backpedaling. No private whispers to relatives after the fact. Public setting, witnesses, facts. He called it seal the story strategy. I almost laughed at how military it sounded. Old habits, I guess. Part of me admires the plan. It's tidy, it's clever, and it aims straight at the problem instead of running from it. But, and there is a big but, it could also explode spectacularly. What if they escalate? What if mom turns it into a melodrama that makes us look unstable? What if Diana deliberately makes a scene so loud and ugly the whole night becomes about us leaving in a tantrum, exactly the narrative they want? I can feel the scenarios like knots in my stomach. So here I am, torn between two kinds of exhaustion. One is the familiar kind: avoid, minimize, pretend everything's fine. The other is a brand new tiredness, the thought of staging a confrontation under chandeliers and crystal, with every relative acting like a jury. We argued a little in whispers that night: practical stuff, rules of engagement. No yelling. If it gets toxic, we leave. No social media posts in the heat of the moment. We'd aim to be calm, precise, and unambiguous. But even with rules, I can't shake the feeling that once we walk into that dining room, something irreversible will happen. And I don't know whether I want that to be our final stand, or our opening salvo. So we're deciding. And the clock is ticking. Update 2. Well, we went. And honestly, I didn't expect things to unravel the way they did, but in the end, I think the outcome was more positive than I could have hoped for. From the second we walked in, my parents were almost over the top happy to see me. My mom hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. She whispered, "I didn't think you'd actually come, I'm so glad you did." I just smiled, nodded, and said nothing. I wasn't about to give her more than that. The first hour passed almost normally. Chit-chat, clinking glasses, the same stale small talk that fills every family gathering. For a second, I thought maybe we'd get through the night without any fireworks. But of course, I should have known better. It started when one of my aunts, half joking, half prying, brought up Diana's love life. All the cousins are married or in relationships, except you, Diana. Hiding a boyfriend? Someone you're planning to marry soon? My sister blushed, gave a coy little smile, the kind that screams I know something you don't. Another cousin chimed in, laughing, "Come on, Diana, spill." That's when my mom, without a second of hesitation, dropped the bomb. "Oh, I don't know if she's got a boyfriend," she said loudly, grinning like a child, "but she's got a big crush on her sister's husband." And she pointed at my husband. Then she burst out laughing like it was the cleverest joke she'd ever told. My dad laughed even harder, pounding the table. My face burned hot. I shot my mom a glare that could have melted steel, but she didn't even notice. She was too busy turning to my aunt, repeating it all over again. "Oh, Diana's been crushing on him for years." And as if the humiliation wasn't enough, my aunt piped up, clueless, "Well then, does your husband have any brothers or cousins she could date?" Some of the relatives actually laughed. Diana just sat there blushing and smiling, soaking it in like it was some sweet compliment instead of the revolting mess it was. My heart thudded in my chest, but I remembered our plan. I wasn't going to shrink, I wasn't going to wait for gossip to twist the truth. This time, I was going to speak loudly enough for everyone to hear. I turned to my mother. "How dare you talk about my husband like that?" My voice cut through the chatter. The table went dead silent. Every eye snapped toward me. I didn't stop. "You both promised me you wouldn't cross this line again. You swore you'd respect our marriage. And yet here we are, you're laughing about my sister's crush on my husband like it's comedy hour. You think it's funny because you're just as idiotic as she is?" Gasps, whispers, but I wasn't done. I turned to the rest of the table. "Tell me, how many of you think it's okay for someone to openly say they have a crush on their sibling's husband, and for the whole family to laugh about it? Do you really think this is normal?" Silence. No one dared answer. Then I turned on Diana. Years of bottled anger poured out. "You've been acting like a creep toward my husband for years. Flirting, touching him, sending late-night texts he never answered, even after he told you to stop. And you brush it off like it's a joke. You stand too close, you try to make him uncomfortable, and everyone here laughs like it's entertainment. Diana's face fell. For once, she wasn't smirking. I spun back to my parents. And you? You've spent years saying my husband would be better off with her. You said it on my wedding day. Do you have any idea how twisted that is? How unbelievably disrespectful it is to me, and to him. Then I locked eyes with my aunt. Would you ever tell your son-in-law he'd be better matched with your other daughter? Would you let your daughter behave like this towards someone else's husband? Her face drained of color, and she shook her head slowly. Exactly. So why is it okay when my parents do it to me? My dad's face was red as fire, fist clenched on the table, ready to explode. I beat him to it. Don't you dare say a word. You think this is all a joke? Maybe you and your sister should get together, you seem to have the same sense of humor. That shut him up fast. My mother's face crumbled. She stammered, tried to laugh it off. I didn't mean anything by it. It's just an innocent crush, that's all. We've always joked about it. That's when my husband struck. Calm, deliberate, lethal. Oh, so everything's just a joke to you? Then I guess when you cheated on your husband with the neighbor, that was just for fun too, right? Just a harmless little crush? He gestured around the table. Come on, everyone, laugh with us. The room froze solid. My mother's eyes went wide with panic. She sputtered, how dare you, but my husband kept going, his voice like steel. Or was it more than a crush? Was it just another one of your funny little games? You could have heard a pin drop. Relatives sat there wide-eyed, jaws slack. The ugly truth I'd carried for years was finally out in the open. My mother snapped, screaming at my husband, claiming he had no right. My father jumped in, calling him disrespectful. But I cut them off. No, you crossed the line the moment you turned my husband into the punchline of your sick games. The moment you excused Diana's behavior like she was a child, when she's a grown woman who should know better. She's not a kid, she's a manipulative adult who milks your guilt for every dime and every ounce of attention she can squeeze. My mother burst into tears, but no one rushed to console her. They were still stuck on what they just heard, the affair, the years of enabling. Diana finally snapped, screaming at me for ruining the party. I shot back, you let mom announce your crush on my husband like it was a trophy. You didn't deny it, you didn't stop it, you basked in it. Don't you dare pin this on me. You started it, and now you're upset I won't play along. The shouting spiraled. My parents yelling, Diana yelling, voices colliding. My husband and I shared a look, we'd done what we came to do. We'd ripped the bandage off. We didn't need to stay in the circus any longer. I stood, raised my hand to quiet them, and said one last thing. It's over. Don't call us unless you're ready to grow up and take responsibility. And when the time comes, don't call us for funerals either. We're done. Then we walked out. Since that night, my phone has been buzzing. Messages from relatives, most of them supportive. Even my aunt, the one who made the careless comment, sent an apology, admitting she should have shut the joke down the second my mom started it. And me? For the first time in years, I feel lighter. Exhausted, yes. But lighter. My husband was right. Ripping the band-aid off was brutal, but it exposed everything. And now, there's no pretending anymore. Update 3. It's been eerily quiet. Too quiet, actually. I thought my phone would be blowing up non-stop, but instead there's been almost nothing. Just a couple of calls from my parents that I let slide into voicemail. And even those messages were surprisingly calm, almost restrained, compared to the shouting match we left behind at that dinner table. I think I understand why. They're embarrassed. Completely humiliated. And they know, deep down, that if they push too hard, if they start the same cycle again, we won't hesitate to go nuclear and air out every skeleton. We already pulled the biggest one out of the closet in front of the entire family. They've realized we're not bluffing anymore. When I replay that night in my head, I keep thinking, we really didn't leave anything unsaid, did we? We could have worded things differently, maybe softened some blows, but in that moment? No. The truth came out raw and sharp, and maybe that's exactly what needed to happen. My husband even told me later that he'd planned to say something like, your sister is such a loser I'd never even consider her, but in the heat of the moment he went straight for the jugular with the infidelity. Honestly? I think he chose the stronger truth. Looking back, I don't regret it. The dinner was chaos, yes, but it was also a turning point. And despite how heavy it felt at the time, leaving with him, walking out side by side, was strangely freeing. We ended the night in the most ordinary way possible, sitting in a booth at a greasy fast food place, wolfing down burgers and fries because we'd barely touched our plates at the party. I remember biting into my burger, salty fries in the middle of the table, and just laughing. Not out of humor, but out of relief. Out of disbelief that we'd actually gone through with it. In that moment, under the buzzing fluorescent lights, grease-stained napkins everywhere, I realized something. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't carrying my parents' dysfunction on my shoulders anymore. And honestly? That feels disturbingly good. Update 4. It's been almost 6 months since my last update, and a lot has happened, some things joyful, some terrifying, and some that left me shaking my head in disbelief. First, despite cutting my sister off completely and warning her more times than I can count, Diana has continued her obsession with my husband. She started sending creepy, unsolicited love letters. Handwritten, rambling things that read like something out of a bad romance novel but with an undertone that made both of us deeply uncomfortable. We told her to stop. We threatened legal action. She didn't care. It was like she believed she was untouchable. Then, about a month ago, our lives took a completely different turn. We found out I'm pregnant. When I saw those 2 little lines, I cried, my husband cried, we hugged each other and just stood there in our kitchen, completely overwhelmed with joy. We couldn't keep it to ourselves, so we shared the news online, thinking it was a safe way to celebrate with friends and extended family. Looking back, maybe that was a mistake. Because earlier this week, everything escalated. My husband got home from work one evening and froze when he saw Diana sitting right on our front porch. Just sitting there, waiting. The moment she saw him, she stood up and started moving toward him. He said the look in her eyes sent a chill down his spine. He didn't even get out of the car, he threw it in reverse and tried to get away. Diana actually chased after the car, begging him to stop, shouting for him to talk to her. The panic he must have felt in that moment makes me sick to think about. He called me immediately, his voice shaking, and I raced home as fast as I could. We both called the police. Thankfully, because we already had reports filed over her letters, it wasn't hard to get her taken into custody. She spent a few days locked up, until, of course, my parents bailed her out. But this time it isn't going away quietly. Diana is facing trial, and we've already filed for a restraining order. The paperwork was still processing when she showed up at our house, but now the case against her is that much stronger. Our lawyer told us something that gave me a strange sense of comfort. If my parents decide to cover her legal defense, it could cost them anywhere between $10,000 and $20,000, possibly more if they hire an expensive attorney. Even if Diana somehow avoids a serious sentence, the financial hit will be significant. My parents live on retirement income. Diana doesn't work. She doesn't contribute a single penny. That kind of money will hurt. I'll admit, it sounds vengeful. But after years of enabling her, after years of them dismissing my pain, maybe the only consequence they'll actually feel is the one that drains their bank account. If Diana insists on living in some romantic fantasy where my husband is her soulmate, and my parents insist on protecting her instead of setting boundaries, then let justice, or at least the cost of it, finally do the work for us. This process will take time. Court dates, lawyers, restraining orders, it's not going to be quick. But for the first time, it feels like we're not just shouting into the void. Something real is happening. And I promise, I'll be back with updates when the next chapter unfolds. Update 5. So much has changed since my last update that it almost feels like a lifetime has passed. We're parents now. Writing that still makes me tear up a little. After everything, after years of chaos, gaslighting, betrayal, we're standing in the middle of a calm, happy chapter one never thought we'd get to see. But before I get carried away with baby smiles and sleepless nights, I promised I'd come back, and the story didn't stop after Diana's last stunt. The restraining order. Not long after I last wrote, we were granted the restraining order against Diana. It was a relief, but it didn't stop her from trying one more time. She actually violated it and tried to approach my husband again. Because of that, my parents lost the bail money they'd put up for her. I can't lie, watching the consequences land exactly where they needed to felt like the universe finally stepping in. The trial. Then came the trial. Diana didn't have a public defender, my parents shelled out money for a private lawyer. I don't know the exact number, but it wasn't cheap. And all that spending did nothing for her. She lost. She ended up serving 6 months total between her pretrial time and post-trial sentence, with mandatory court-ordered therapy tacked on. For the first time, someone outside the family forced her to face reality. My parents' divorce. And here's something I never thought I'd say, my parents are divorced. Turns out even my father has a breaking point. Maybe it was the town whispering about mom's affair, maybe it was the shame from Diana's behavior, maybe it was the mounting financial strain, but he finally decided enough was enough. My mother took Diana in after the divorce. They've both had to go back to work, because between the trial costs and the separation, living off savings is no longer an option. Social fallout. The ripple effect spread through the rest of the family, too. Cousins, aunts, uncles, they've started distancing themselves from my parents. Some refused to lend money during the trial. Others unfriended or outright blocked them on social media. And the town? Let's just say their reputations aren't the best kept secret anymore. When people hear their names, they know exactly what went down. It's been so bad they couldn't even keep their house. After the divorce, my dad moved out of state, and my mom only managed to find a place a few towns over, since Diana isn't allowed to leave the state. Life now. I won't pretend there isn't still a sliver of fear knowing Diana is technically not far away. But she has a restraining order against her and a record now. She's reckless, but not so reckless she'd risk going back behind bars. And on the brighter side, life has never been sweeter. My husband and I are navigating the chaos of new parenthood together. We're tired, yes, but we're happy. Really, genuinely happy. Gratitude. So this is where I leave things for now, with gratitude. Thank you to everyone who followed along, who encouraged me when I doubted myself, who reminded me I wasn't crazy for demanding respect. What started with a simple anniversary invitation spiraled into one of the hardest, messiest chapters of my life. But here we are, stronger, more united, and finally at peace. And I wouldn't trade that for anything.